this next session is about a particularly unusual view of the substance use disorder crisis in our country, but it's about a film called Inheritance. And we're joined here by Matt Moyer, who made this film with his partner, Amy Toensing. And that was a project of 11 years. And I had an opportunity to see this film earlier this year and thought it would be an interesting way to talk about substance use disorder, and particularly the impact it has in families where it is a multi-generational issue, along with poverty and trauma. And I have never seen anything quite like it. But before we start talking about the film, I want to introduce Matt properly and tell you a little bit about him. Matt is the producer, director, and cinematographer for Inheritance. He is a photographer and filmmaker. He covered 9/11 in New York City, the Iraq War for the New York Times, has photographed multiple feature stories for Nat Geo magazine. He's directed short documentaries that have been featured by a number of outlets, including Nat Geo Society and PBS. He was named a Knight Wallace Journalism Fellow at the University of Michigan in 2008 and also received a Knight Fellowship at Ohio University in 2012. He teaches regularly for National Geographic Photo Camps, an organization that teaches photography to underserved youth throughout the world. Unfortunately, his partner, Amy Toensing, is not going to be able to join the conversation. She was also a producer and director of Inheritance and also a visual journalist. Both describe themselves as journalists. And I think when you see part of this film, you'll see the sort of the power of that way of approaching this subject through visual journalism. So Matt, I just want to start out by thanking you for this film. As I said when we talked earlier, it's unusual in its intimacy and forthrightness. And I saw it described in one place as unflinching. And that got me thinking about what it means to flinch from a painful subject, which is what I think we sometimes see in reporting on substance use disorder, poverty, and trauma. This film, which took such a long time to make, feels sort of like the antidote to that. I've now seen it twice, but I would really like it if you would just sort of briefly describe to our audience what this film's about. How do you tell people what this film is about?
Thanks, Catherine. I appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here. I wish my better half could be here with me. Amy is on a shoot. We are both co-directors, co-producers of the film, and we're also married. The fact that we survived making a independent documentary film and are still, today's actually our anniversary of all things. So
Congratulations.
thank you. And um, not sure we'll survive the next one, but we'll see. And it was a labor of love, and we felt really compelled to tell the story. We did not know going in that it was going to be an 11-year odyssey. Like so many doc films, you find a story, you start down the path, and then it continues to open up in front of you.
Mm.
And that's, to answer your question, Catherine, that's this film. So as you mentioned, I was a Knight Fellow at Ohio University, and Amy also, just to give a little bit of her bio, folks who are listening or watching can Google her. Amazing photographer. We actually met at National Geographic magazine while we were both back from assignments, and she also was a Knight Wallace Fellow at the University of Michigan about 10 years after I was. So it's both of us to have that experience was pretty amazing. When I was in Ohio, though, studying for my master's on the Knight Fellowship, different Knight Fellowship, I was down there, and I had been a long time photojournalist, and both Amy and I come from uh, visual journalism and photojournalism. We both started at small newspapers, and we would document. People very often get confused when we say photojournalist. Your audience very well might not, but I always feel compelled to talk a little bit about it. That really, we are trying to do the same thing that a text journalist does, but we're telling the story through visuals. And a lot of publications, unfortunately, I think miss the boat on that, where they give a quick assignment to the photographer as an afterthought. Oh, go out and take a picture of such and such to illustrate whatever was written.
Mm.
We really come from a place where we approach it very much equally in the journalistic aspect. So it's important to us when we talk about it. That's kind of where we're rooted, which is how we both ended up at National Geographic. That's one of the only places that gives you the time and, frankly, at least used to prioritize the photography as the
Mm.
main storytelling apparatus for communicating a story.
Mhm.
So we, I had been a long time still photographer, and I went back to OU, went to OU to get my master's and to study the moving image. I was interested in documentary, I was interested in cinema and video journalism. So while I was there, I went out, I think, on my very first self assignment to go out as I was trying to practice learning how to shoot video. And I was going to do a project on food insecurity. Athens, Ohio is right there in Appalachia. There's a tremendous amount of folks who are struggling economically. And at this point, this was 2012. I wanted to do a story on food insecurity. When I went to a church where they were handing out food, I was filming, and a young man came up to me, and he just walked up. He saw my camera, and he just kind of threw his story out to me, just unloaded. He just needed to get it out, and he ended up becoming one of the main characters of our film. When he told me his story of tragedy, of addiction, of incarceration, of a path toward trying to get his life on track, JP Bowling opened up himself to me, and I said, "Can I tell your story?" And he said, "Sure." And so I then did a short film on him for my master's project. Amy came on to assist as a second camera. And this was 2012. So this was right as the opioid epidemic was really starting to come to our collective consciousness. It was actually, we were kind of a little bit on the middle front edge of that.
Mhm.
And so as we started to document this man's journey, we also looked around the community, and we looked around the rest of his family members, and we saw something that at that point was kind of new for us to look at as a concept, which is this community is really struggling. And
Mhm.
there is an addiction epidemic here, and a struggle that's taking place. And so we were interested in continuing to tell that story. But JP, he's covered in prison tats. He was in a white supremacist gang. He is incredibly charismatic, deeply thoughtful, but not the most empathetic individual that people would feel a great deal of empathy towards because
Mhm.
of some of the directions that his life had taken him.
Yeah.
So uh, toward the tail end of reporting on that project, I went down and started interviewing a bunch of other family members of his. And that was when I met Curtis. And Curtis was 12 years old at that point. This was now in 2017. And he had a wisdom, he had a way of speaking about the crisis that his family had been dealing with. Every adult in his sphere, aunts, uncles, cousins, um, parents, grandparents, had all either were actively battling substance use disorder or had battled it and come through to some degree of recovery. But the familial trauma was there. And he
Yep.
spoke very eloquently about that. And at that point, Amy and I decided, okay, this is somebody who folks could feel a great deal of empathy towards, it brings up the question of what pathways does a 12-year-old growing up in that environment have? How do they know to navigate and get out? Is there assistance? All of these questions came to us, and that's when we really knew that we wanted to continue following Curtis. We didn't know it would be 6 years, but that's what it ended up being.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned this community, and we've been talking about rural communities today, and the pictures that we have in our mind of who lives there and what those communities are like. And I think I'd like to give people a sense of the community in where this family lives in Appalachian, Ohio. So maybe, Marga, maybe we could show that first clip where Cheryl, the grandmother in this family, is talking about this place where they live and how it's changed over the years.
This is the opening of the film, and Cheryl, the matriarch of the family, is introducing us to really the story, and she ends up being a guide throughout the rest of the film in many ways.
The Ohio River, they say, is contaminated. I don't think it's very healthy. I really don't. You see barges all down the river. You don't see as many. Not near as many. I liked it down here. I love it down here. I still love it. But since I've been in Pomeroy, this place has really went down. People just lose their jobs and had no way of making the money down here. There's nothing down here. Nothing down here for kids. They had a skate rink where my kids used to go. They closed it down. Our family all live close by each other. And we do work together to raise kids. Yeah, we do. I just hope my grandkids have a better future than what I had.
Okay, this is an obsidian rock, and this is a pumice rock. And basically, it's also a volcanic rock. It's more like a scratchy type of rock. This one is like a glass. Obsidian is like a glass type. I would be obsidian because it's really hard and it's not easy to change. I would also be obsidian because it's reflective. It's like shiny. And it's not really that easy for you to just break.
Yeah, that's Curtis.
Yeah.
He reflects what's around him, but that's a tough kid.
Mm.
So could you talk about your purpose in making this film and how you talked to the family about, we talked about the walkthrough that you did with them about, what the film would entail and why you wanted to make it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll kind of go through because there's so many different folks who are in the film, so many different participants. You know, to a person, there were discussions and expressions of wanting to use their story to help communicate what families and folks are struggling with. And also, I think a number of them wanted to have their story be a cautionary tale in a lot of ways. Extraordinarily brave and open, and on a level that as somebody who often is behind the camera, you know, it's hard for me to understand the bravery that they have to open themselves up. And so JP, he and I talked explicitly early on when we first started the project about, you know, he really wanted to use, in fact, he says this in the film at one point, that he wants to get his message out. He wants to use his message to do good and hopefully impact people and teach them, don't do what I did. That was JP's, you know, sort of real driving motivation there. And then after that, Curtis, that time that you see him there, actually I had filmed him just a week or two prior to that. But we started to film him, and he immediately, the same thing. It was really amazing. At 12 years old, he expressed very clearly, this is something that people need to know about. And he says, you know, drugs don't just hurt you, they hurt the people around you. And that was the message that he wanted to get across. Now he's a 12-year-old, so you know, that was very impressive. But then speaking to other family members, person after person was talking about how they felt their story, and they talked very openly to a point where I think they want to have pride in what they have gone through and what they've witnessed and the struggles that they've had. And they're still around. They're still fighting the good fight. They have good days and bad days, but there's so much love there in the family that I think they take great pride in that, and they should. I do remember one, you know, I had all these different conversations. I would check in with Curtis, you know, time and time again when, you know, I would kind of go down, and maybe Amy and I would go, and we'd come into town for a week or two and we'd film, but we always did interviews of each individual that we could or who was available. And we would have a conversation. I'd talk to Curtis and say, how do you feel about the film? Are you still, you know, what do you want it to do? How are you feeling about this? And, you know, every time he says, I want this to help. I want this to teach people about these things. And I remember there was one time where Curtis's mom I was there and I was filming. I had been there, you know, for a couple of years at this point, on and off. And a friend of Curtis's came over, and he had never been there before. I hadn't seen him. He was kind of a new person to show up, and here I am with this camera, and I'm walking around. I'm kind of in everybody's business. I'm chatting with them. I'm filming, and he's like, "What is going on? What is with this camera?" And I started to explain to him, and Curtis's mom yelled from the other room and answered, and she said, I forget exactly. She said, "Oh, he's making a film to tell people not to F their life up with drugs." And she like yelled it from the other room. And I, you know, it was one of those moments I wouldn't have, you know, said it that way at all. And that wasn't really the purpose of the film. It was much more to create understanding and empathy for folks who are caught in cycles that are outside of their control in many ways.
Right. I want to jump in right there because there's a moment of keen self-awareness, more than one, in this film. And the clip I want to show next is where John, and he's the grandfather, right, Matt? He talks about the hereditary nature of addiction, where he compares it to other chronic disease, which really drives home at that moment, like, and you feel this repeatedly throughout the film, how much the deck feels stacked against every kid in that family. And because the film centers on Curtis, you start to really feel worried for him. Yeah, that's the generational trauma that this film really does get at. And it's not the only trauma, right? There's a lot of it. There are people going to prison and coming back from prison, and separation of parent from child, which has a profound impact on children. There's not a lot of research on the impact that substance use disorder in families has on children. But one of the things that it is out there to see is that the separation from parents has a profound impact on kids. So, you were watching all of this over all these years, and you're a parent, and I want to ask you, what was that like at times to be so close to watching this kind of pain, especially for these kids? There's all this love and protection going on at the same time, but there's only so much you can protect a child from whose mother is going away because she's in trouble. Did you ever feel like you wanted to just reach out and rescue?
No, because we all can look at our families, and a person could come in and take a look at what's going on in any one of our families and see probably some things that are not healthy, are not necessarily the best mental health or the best eating habits or the best, and I'm not necessarily saying, I'm not being a relativist, but I do think that what I experienced, and I actually took a great deal away from this family that's positive.
Oh,
I
yeah.
have a very great relationship with my parents, and my brother and my family. But we're pretty buttoned down with our emotions. We are open with each other and we care and all this, but being around this family, I actually took away a lesson, interestingly enough, of how I want to be a better father. Um, there's a scene in the film, I don't know if we're going to see it or not, I can't remember, but where uh, Curtis's mom is struggling with some emotion, and she literally crawls up onto the lap of her mother. She's a grown woman,
Yeah.
and she crawls up onto the lap of Cheryl and hugs her and kisses her. And I look at that and I see there is trauma, there is difficulty, there is conflict in this family, and there is substance use disorder, and there's all sorts of things. But I saw this love and this
Right.
expression with each other that was deeply profound.
Mm-hmm.
So it, you know, no, it's mixed, right? Because I
Right.
did see things with the kids where I wanted something to be happening differently, and
Yes.
I never saw any situation where I felt like, oh, I have to intervene and you know pick up a kid and go running out of there or something.
Right.
It wasn't that. This is much more nuanced than that.
Oh, yes, it is.
And when Curtis goes into foster care. He's been in multiple times, but he went into foster care. The way he expressed being away from his family, I mean, it was a much more buttoned down experience. Everything, they were sitting and doing their homework and the lights were on and everything was, you know, all
Mhm.
tidy and kind of what you'd picture it maybe should be. But boy, he was struggling being away from his loved ones and home,
Right.
and probably it had significant trauma. So the idea of scooping up and quote unquote saving in some ways very, very complicated, and not something that I'm qualified to make that decision. you
Well,
know.
there is just so much love there.
Yes.
And you know, that's why I felt that the film was so respectful of them and all of what they are and so humanizing because it didn't depict them as people who use drugs. It
Right.
was they were a loving family. And in the midst of all this, there are people with this disease and they're really struggling
But people who use drugs are loving in so
people.
many ways. I
Yes.
mean, I think that the and
Yeah.
Curtis speaks wholeheartedly to this, that the person using the drug will very often be taken over by the
Yeah.
drug, and their decisions can absolutely lead to non-loving actions and lead to extraordinarily horrible circumstances. But that's the key here that I found, and my wife Amy also, when we dug into this is complex. These are human beings as
Yeah.
complex as I am or you are or anyone else.
Right.
And we need, the number one thing that we need to do is realize that somebody who is struggling using drugs, there is so many other layers there, and regret and self-harm and depression and anyone who's struggled with those sorts of mental health issues or any mental health issues can fully understand that there is a darkness there. There's something that can drag you down. Some people turn to substances to escape, but ultimately they're still, you know, people that we need to look at with empathy and try to help as a society.
Right.
And that goes to childhood poverty, that goes to more mental health services. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah. Yes. So I do want to show the scene then where Curtis is reunited with his mother because it is, you know, to this point, um, I think that it's very powerful in showing that this is a very cohesive family in spite of the times and the ways that it's pulled apart. Yeah, that's the one. Sorry, I got choked up watching that. Oh man. So,
Hard not to.
yeah. So, what do you hope happens with this film? What would you like to see its how would you like to see it sort of go out into the world?
Yeah. You know, well, I think I sort of have multi-pronged series of hopes, if you will. And I think, Amy feels the same way. We want the film to have a full life. We want it to. We're in the middle of an impact campaign right now, and we want to screen the film in communities that are battling with these issues. We want to, and just to be clear, that's not just rural communities.
Right,
Same issues that this family is dealing with are the same issues that we can find in families in large, small, urban, rural communities. They're
right.
talking about trauma that is, intergenerational, not enough healthcare, not enough support for kids who are struggling and
Mhm.
coming from poverty in these situations. So this is an issue all throughout America. We want to show the film. We're actively screening it in many places with healthcare professionals, with students, with one thing that Curtis talks about. He says, "I want my teachers to see this, public
Yeah,
school teachers,
yeah,
because he was the kid who was in school who was sleeping or misbehaving or struggling, and teachers rarely knew what was
yeah.
going on." Now, I come from a home with two public school teachers. Both my parents were public school teachers. I know they're on the front lines and they're doing amazing work, but it's easy to forget sometimes or not know what some students might be dealing with at home. So that's one part, active impact campaign. We also would like to have this have a very large general audience to be able to see it, because we really believe that that empathy drives action.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel that our film drives empathy. And so if a large number of people can see this film, streaming service, maybe we can get it out onto one of the larger services, or we would love to show it maybe on some PBS stations or something,
Right.
so that we have a larger audience so folks can start to learn more about their neighbors, about the kid who maybe they see coming from a family that's maybe struggling. A lot of times we walk away, we don't look, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's so important for us to see what we can do in our communities and speak to our representatives, congressional representatives, legislative representative, local and national. And during our impact campaign, we actually went with Curtis, the chief participant, who now is a big, tall, 19-year-old, kid. Um, he came to us to Capitol Hill, and we had multiple meetings on Capitol Hill.
So how is he doing?
He is a 19-year-old kid who is trying to figure out, like any 19-year-old kid, what his direction's going to be. He doesn't totally know. But he's
Mm-hmm.
also a young man who comes from a really hard background.
Yeah.
And he's doing well. He's doing work, and he's, I think, yeah, trying to find his path.
Yeah. We have a question here that I'd love to hear you answer. How did you build trust with this family to get them to share such vulnerable moments with you?
Uh, I think this goes to a certain extent to where Amy and I started as journalists, as photojournalists. As I had said, we started at small newspapers. I started in a small newspaper in upstate New York, Auburn, New York, going out documenting my community. And when you go and you do a story on a farm family or something going on in town, and you're going to bump into them at the grocery store for the next couple weeks, or you're going to see them around, you need to get it right, and you need to treat them. You need to be honest, because that's your job as a journalist, but you need to
Yep.
treat them with the dignity they deserve. And so that was really it. It was being transparent, talking through what we thought the story was, um, and spending time to get to know folks. And a lot of that was not with the camera running.
Right.
It was, my wife and I went down there with our young daughter, spent time with the family. Um, we have a video clip. My daughter still talks about it, where we actually were getting set up for an interview, and we were rolling. And my daughter at the time, she was maybe two, a year and a half, and she was sitting on Curtis's lap. Curtis was bouncing her, and he turned. You kind of let go, and he turned, and she started to fall back. And we have it on film, and he reaches and grabs her. And so we always tease Curtis now, you almost dropped our daughter. And our daughter's like, Curtis almost dropped me. And so, we connected and spent time. And not that it was always easy, of course, but we just put in the time, and we were honest, and hopefully they knew that we were going to try to do right by them.
Yeah.
I don't know if we did. They may change their mind. Who knows? These things are always a work in progress. But we're not perfect, but we certainly tried to honor their story.
Right. When you and I talked earlier before this session, you talked about the film being polarizing, that there have been reactions. There's been pretty, polarized reactions to it. Why do you think that is?
Oh, well, I think what you're talking about, we have had the vast majority of people have gotten it. That we've spoken to have been deeply moved. You're talking about, you got choked up for a reason,
Right.
and the film, there's some interesting things. So we had an individual who works in sort of government or government affiliated services, trying to help folks like this family actually in that community. And when this individual found out about the film, they were really upset and very much against the idea of it. Immediate reaction was, here we go again, another sort of takedown of Appalachia, another caricature of these folks. Some folks throw around the term poverty porn, which I don't like the term, but I think I understand what they're trying to say. But this individual ended up seeing the film at a conference and now wants us to show the film. So they watched it, they got it. They had a reaction and then they watched it. Now, some folks have watched the film and haven't liked it or have pushed back on the idea that they felt maybe it was exploitive or whatever. And people are going to have their feelings. I don't think it is, in large part because Curtis, the chief participant, is actively working with us to try to change things. He's involved with the process after the film.
Right.
And Cheryl is willing to, but she doesn't like to talk in front of people. So she has said she's not going there. So a film like this, I think, that is unvarnished, that is very honest, and challenging, is going to push some buttons. And I think people in that regard are feeling it. One other thing I want to say is I think one of the things we talked about with that back and forth and that discord that might exist, there was a film festival that we were told this film was the most contentious discussion they had ever had about a film at the film festival. They ended up showing the film, but the contention, the discussion that we sort of found out about, to my understanding, I wasn't in the room, was that there's a real movement right now in documentary that I think could have a chilling effect. It says that you can't tell a story about a community that you are not actively a member of the community.
Right.
Or they very much worry about any sort of power that sits with the filmmaker and not necessarily with the participant. Right. Those are real and legitimate questions because so many wrongs have been done previously. It's important to talk about. But both my wife and I have substance use history in our families, mental health history. We don't live in Ohio, but I'm from upstate New York. We get these communities and have grown up and spent time in similar communities. So there's a real battle there. That's a hard answer, but try to answer the best I can there.
Well, and people sometimes want solutions, right?
Yes.
And as you don't propose any.
No.
Right, because that's beyond the scope of what you wanted to accomplish with the film.
We interviewed tons of experts. We interviewed a law enforcement officer who knows the family, has arrested almost all of them over the last 30 years. And he works in the community and he's seen, he's an expert from that perspective. Pastor, drug czar for Ohio. I mean, all these different folks we interviewed. In the end, we didn't put them in part because we felt like it took away from the power of the family, their experience. We don't need an expert telling. We can spend an hour and a half or so with Curtis and his family, and the viewer can understand so much from that experiential experience, right? Not necessarily being told by a quote unquote expert. And we don't give solutions in large part because that's kind of beyond our scope. And I think that the solutions, first and foremost, there needs to be a commitment, which there isn't right now. There isn't a commitment nationally. There isn't a commitment in government to do what it takes to get to and help kids like Curtis. And so we wanted to first get to the place where there maybe, because of that empathy, could become a commitment. Because what each community needs is going to be somewhat different.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked what you had to say, you and Amy, talking about this film being the start of a conversation in communities, bringing people together, watching the film. News organizations do convene events, and I could see how in places in the United States where substance use disorder has been a real, continues to be a real problem, a devastating one, that news organizations could show this film to have a really robust discussion of what's not being done, and are we truly committed to trying to help.
For sure. And I would take it even, I think that the film, I've spent a lot of time with film, so somebody watching it once through may or may not get this, but I think the film is almost equal parts substance use disorder, intergenerational trauma, uh, and really the whole umbrella is mental health,
Right.
because substance use disorder, we like to, people think of it as like this criminal issue, and it's not. And in fact, the law enforcement officer I mentioned before, 30 years experience, etc., he says you cannot incarcerate your way out of this.
Mm-hmm.
You need services that get to the root cause. And that was a large part of what we found with the film. When we look at JP in the film, his primary drug was heroin. First, it was oxy, and then into heroin. Very common, progression with opioids. But John, who we saw earlier talking about the trauma he experienced with his father, he was into cocaine and crack, and his father was into alcohol. This is something that has to do much more about mental health. The drugs will change, the escape, the trying to fill the void, all of these things will change. And there will be another drug. Now it's fentanyl, but there will be, when fentanyl or opioids get too expensive, it shifts back to meth. It is this constant moving between substances, but the underlying causes are much larger than what's coming across the border. It's about what's going on in communities, in families, and how we as a society are helping those folks work on the trauma and the struggles and the mental health issues that they're feeling.
I'm just going to ask you this one last question, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap. How can reporters put aside their potential biases when reporting on substance abuse disorder? What do you think those biases are, Matt?
Oh, I think there is not always, in this, as a journalist, I've worked in newsrooms. I know there's pressure to edit down, to simplify, right? To now it's even more so than it used to be.
Right.
Can you put it in a 15-second viral, clip that's going to go up on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it might be?
Mm-hmm.
I think that resisting simplifying the issue to, oh, this is an opioid issue. No, I mean, opioids are special because of the addictive nature, the much higher addictive nature than other drugs. But this is a deeper issue. So I would say resist the urge to oversimplify. Come at it from the prism of, why is this person using? What are they trying to escape? What are they trying to give a self-medication to avoid? That's the real issue. And what are our communities doing for that? That includes transportation for people who are impoverished or lower on the economic spectrum. Transportation to get to treatment. In this community, Columbus was where most of the treatment centers were. If you don't have a car, or if your license is suspended, or you don't have money for gas, you're not getting treatment.
How far away was Columbus?
About an hour.
Yeah.
Hour and a half. Yeah.
Right.
Depending.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really does. It is so suggestive of so many upstream causes. And that's how one of the reasons I love that it starts on the river, because it evoked for me this idea of this is all coming downstream to this place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
And
Kat.
again, for the film, because I feel like it was something we needed. I needed. I can't speak for others, and I do hope lots of people see it. Marga, thank you so much for queuing up the clips for us. Tell Amy I'm sorry that she couldn't join us, and best of luck.
Thank you so
I hope
much.
it gets out there in a big way. Thank
I
you so much.
appreciate it so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye-bye now.
All right, bye.